The house at Briar Hollow, 1839, 3 miles outside the town of Ashbourne, North Carolina, there stood a house that no one wanted to inherit. Its windows were shuttered even in summer, and the trees that grew too near the foundation twisted toward the walls as though drawn by some invisible gravity. They said the house had once belonged to a scholar, a man whose devotion to science exceeded his devotion to God. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. What follows was pieced together from letters, court filings, and personal journals that survived a courthouse fire in 1923. What they describe would have been dismissed as rumor if not for the precision of the documentation, the calm handwriting of witnesses, and the way every account seems to stop mid-thought, as though the author had seen something they could not bear to record. The Whitlock family settled in Briar Hollow in 1798. By 1839, the estate had passed to Nathaniel Whitlock, a man of respected lineage but failing fortune. His wife, Margaret, had died giving birth to their only child, Eleanor, in 1827. The neighbors described Nathaniel as courteous but cold, a man whose interests lay not in social life, but in the study of the human frame, a phrase that made sense only to those who had seen the basement rooms of the house. Old ledgers indicate that Whitlock, like many men of his class, maintained enslaved laborers to work the surrounding fields. But testimony from the few who survived long enough to speak later hinted that the cellar was not used for storage or wine, but for instruction. That word appears repeatedly in later correspondence, though what precisely was taught there no one ever defined. In the spring of 1839, a traveling physician named Dr. Elias Crane began visiting Briar Hollow under the pretense of conducting anatomical studies. Dr. Crane's notebooks, recovered decades later, record measurements of bone density, pulse rates, and maternal inheritance anomalies. His tone is disturbingly clinical. Subject E, female, age 12, delicate constitution, shows peculiar clarity of perception despite visual weakness. The father insists upon continuation of regimen, results promising. Subject E was Eleanor Whitlock. In the same year, the estate's ledgers show abrupt financial distress. Tobacco yields failed, several debts came due, and Nathaniel began liquidating parcels of land. Yet curiously, one account labeled medical consultation shows a payment of $472 to Dr. Crane, an enormous sum for what should have been a routine visit. The first external account of something amiss comes from a local pastor, Reverend Henry Tuttle, who recorded a visit to Briar Hollow in July 1839. His journal describes being led through the house by a silent servant, the air heavy with the odor of chemicals and iron. He wrote that Nathaniel appeared distracted, his hands trembling, and that Eleanor, when introduced, did not meet his gaze. "The child seemed aware of my presence, but not of herself," Tuttle wrote. "She asked, quite suddenly, whether souls can be divided between generations. When I told her no, she smiled faintly and said, 'Father says otherwise.'" No other details of that conversation survive, but within months, several workers at the estate disappeared from county records. Their name, Sysak Jacob Louisar, crossed out in the plantation inventory with a single notation, transferred. Where they were sent was never documented. A later deposition by a midwife, Ada Raines, sheds more light, though her statement is fragmented by fear. She describes being summoned to the estate in the autumn of that same year to attend to Eleanor, who was unwell. Raines wrote that she expected to treat a fever but found the girl pale and trembling, her wrists covered in bruises as though bound for restraint. Nathaniel dismissed Raines the next morning, paying her double her usual rate and warning her not to speak of what she had seen. She never returned. The first whisper of scandal surfaced in 1840 when Nathaniel applied for a medical import license, an unusual request for a landowner. He claimed he required certain specimens for anatomical study to educate local apprentices. The license was granted by Magistrate Calvin Pierce, a known associate and creditor of the Whitlock family, By 1841, neighbors reported strange activity at the house. A faint blue light was said to emanate from the basement windows at night. Servants who left the property described hearing rhythmic sounds from below the floorboards, as of a heart too large for its body. No one in Ashbourne confronted Nathaniel directly. He was, after all, a man of standing. The last letter Eleanor is known to have written survives in partial form, preserved among Reverend Tuttle's papers. It is dated March 2, 1843, written in an uneven hand. I am not allowed outside anymore. Father says the sun weakens me. He says I am to be perfected soon, that mother's error will not be repeated. I asked when I might see the garden again, but he only smiled. I think he has forgotten what sunlight looks like. The remainder of the page is torn away. What happened inside Briar Hollow between 1839 and 1846 remains the subject of speculation. Court documents hint that debts were settled suddenly in 1846, following the unexplained sale of a specimen, recorded simply as male infant. No child appears in the family Bible, no local birth record exists, yet financial ledgers show an influx of gold that same month, gold traced years later to a merchant broker in Charleston. When Reverend Tuttle returned to the estate that autumn, Nathaniel refused to let him in. The pastor wrote that he heard a sound upstairs like a woman laughing and sobbing at once. A week later, Tuttle was transferred to another parish, and so the Whitlock family faded from local record. By the time of the 1850 census, the estate was described as stabilized. Nathaniel listed himself as widowed with one dependent, Eleanor, age 20, 3 invalid. The journals stop there. The silence that follows feels deliberate, as though someone ensured that no more would be written. But something was. Hidden in an attic chest discovered in 1923, after the courthouse fire, were 5 sheets of paper, unsigned, unsealed, smelling faintly of laudanum and ink. The handwriting matches Eleanor's early letters. They begin, "If anyone finds this, know that father is not what he seems. What he calls science is hunger. What he calls inheritance is rot. There are bones beneath this house that bear my name." The last line trails into darkness. If this discovery unsettles you, there's more ahead: records, experiments, and a trail of silence that lasted nearly a century. What really happened beneath Briar Hollow, and who exactly was the specimen that saved the Whitlock estate? The House of Silence, 1840-1843. The surviving records from this period are fragmented, scraps of correspondence, incomplete ledgers, and the occasional sermon note that survived in church archives. But taken together, they paint a portrait not of madness erupting suddenly, but of moral decay tightening its grip slowly, methodically, until no one in Ashbourne could tell where science ended and sin began. The earliest surviving account after Reverend Tuttle's visit comes from Dr. Elias Crane's second notebook, dated November 1840. In it, he records his renewed visits to Briar Hollow under the pretense of continued research into familial degeneracy. His tone remains detached, almost sterile. Observation: Subject E remains compliant, though physically weakened. Vision deteriorates, occasional tremors of the hands. Subject's father insists this is expected. I have advised continued administration of tincture to suppress feverish episodes. Subject demonstrates peculiar clarity during delirium, referencing maternal resemblances inconsistent with household accounts. Crane never specifies what those inconsistencies were, but later annotations hint that Eleanor's mother, Margaret, had not died of complications in childbirth as Nathaniel claimed. The phrasing "maternal resemblances inconsistent with household accounts" has been interpreted by historians as a veiled acknowledgement of deeper deception, perhaps even falsification of lineage. The next major document is a letter dated March 17, 1841, written by Nathaniel Whitlock himself to a Charleston broker named Thomas Garrison. The letter was recovered from coastal archives nearly a century later. Our arrangement must remain discreet. The local authorities are watchful. Deliveries will be received at the south cellar. Ensure your man does not speak in town. Payment will be rendered in coin upon verification of vitality and conformity. The phrasing is chilling in its ambiguity. Vitality and conformity could refer to livestock or to human subjects. The truth of what passed through the cellar doors at Briar Hollow was known only to those who entered them, and few did. Meanwhile, in Ashbourne, the community's unease deepened. Parish records show a decline in church attendance from the Whitlock estate. Tuttle's replacement, Reverend Asadimer, noted in his journal that Nathaniel appeared gaunt and anxious. While Elinor was carried into the pew by two servants, eyes clouded but attentive, she whispered throughout the sermon. Deemer wrote, "Not prayers, but numbers, sequences of them, as though reciting measures. When I greeted her afterward, she asked if I believed the soul has a structure. I could not answer her." By the summer of 1841, the estate's operations had grown secretive. Visitors were no longer admitted to the main house. Nathaniel corresponded with Dr. Crane using coded phrases, reagents, samples, subjects. Crane's final entry from that period mentions an unnamed assistant, new attendant provided by Mr. Whitlock, female, middle-age, literate, assigned to monitor subject E's condition nightly, reports to me weekly. That attendant was Ada Raines. Her presence, though omitted from official household listings, would later prove crucial in reconstructing the truth. Her private writings, never meant for publication, survived through her descendants and were discovered in 1947. In them, she describes her first impressions of Briar Hollow. The air was stale as a tomb. The girl slept much of the day, muttering in dreams. I saw bruises at her temples. When I asked Mr. Whitlock about them, he said she had fallen during a fit. He forbade me to speak of it again. I began to fear the house itself was sick. Over the following months, Raines observed strange rituals conducted at night. She heard chanting, low and rhythmic, from below the parlor floor. Once she saw Nathaniel carry a basin upstairs filled with what she described as dark liquid, thick as oil. He ordered her not to enter the lower rooms. He said it was a place for science, not for women, but I have smelled blood before, and that was blood. In 1842, Dr. Crane's visits ceased abruptly. His surviving papers show no further mention of Elinor or the Whitlock estate after that year. Some historians believe he attempted to distance himself when he realized the scope of Nathaniel's actions. Others think he met a quieter end. The Ashbourne Medical Register lists his death as sudden fever in 1844, though no burial site is recorded. Elinor's condition worsened. Parish alms accounts show recurring purchases of laudanum and chloroform charged to the Whitlock household. Ada's letters mention the girl's mind breaking under weight of silence. One entry reads, she asks daily whether her mother was real. Sometimes she insists she hears a woman singing under the floorboards. Mr. Whitlock tells her it is the wind, but the song has words. I know because I have heard them. By 1843, something shifted in the town's perception of Nathaniel Whitlock. Rumors spread that he had begun corresponding with northern physicians about the transmission of virtue through the bloodline. It was whispered that he intended to prove a hereditary theory of moral perfection, that vice, deformity, and sin could be measured and culled. On March 2, 1843, Elinor wrote her final surviving letter, the one Reverend Tuttle later preserved. 2 weeks later, local records show a physician named Dr. Ephraim Stokes registering at the county courthouse as a medical witness. His signature appears beneath a document titled Certificate of Nervous Hysteria, Miss E. Whitlock. The certificate declared Elinor unfit for public interaction due to delusional ideation and hallucination. The diagnosis effectively legalized her confinement. From that point onward, Elinor ceased to exist in the public record as a person. She became a patient, a dependent, a justification for further study. Every subsequent reference to her in legal or medical documentation omits any mention of her voice, her agency, her suffering. Ada's letters describe that transformation with heartbreaking clarity. He calls her by a number now, Experiment 7. He tells me she must be purified of her mother's affliction. I do not know what he means. The cellar doors stay locked, but I can smell the burning. The county, bound by hierarchy and silence, looked away. Reverend Deemer's later sermons began hinting at moral infection, spreading among the gentry but never named names. Magistrate Pierce continued to approve Nathaniel's requests for licenses, shipments, and legal attestations. And so the pattern continued, paper over paper, lie upon lie, until every trace of truth was buried under ink and official language. By winter of 1843, Eleanor's name vanished from all correspondence except Ada's private notes. And in those, a single phrase repeats at the close of every entry: she is fading, but the house grows stronger. Whatever Nathaniel Whitlock was attempting inside Briar Hollow, be it science, obsession, or damnation, it was no longer bound by human restraint. The town would not realize the depth of what had happened there until the first documented transaction in 1846, when the sale of a single infant would save the estate and doom everyone connected to it. The Ledger of Flesh 1846-1849, the account books of the Whitlock estate, resumed abruptly in April of 1846, after a gap of nearly 3 years. The handwriting is not Nathaniel's. It is steadier, more deliberate, signed A. R. at the bottom of each page. Scholars now agree this was Ada Raines, forced by necessity or fear to maintain the records when Nathaniel's own hands could no longer manage it. The entries appear mundane at first glance: purchases of laudanum, oil, salt, and lime. But between the familiar transactions, coded notations appear: C1, S7, N3, each followed by weights and measures written in ounces, not pounds. One page, now stained beyond legibility, includes this single line: received one male infant, 10 months, condition viable, to be prepared by instruction. It was through this notation that modern historians traced the first confirmed instance of trade in living specimens tied to the Whitlock experiments. The broker's name, Thomas Garrison, matches that in Nathaniel's 1841 letter. The shipment, recorded as livestock, was accepted under the estate's agricultural license. From this point onward, the documents take on the texture of something unspeakably procedural. Every child, every subject, is listed as material, sex, approximate age, and final state, integrated. Preserved, or released, the reality beneath those words did not surface until 1898, when the county archivist Jesse Holt uncovered a crate of sealed jars in the ruins of the Briar Hollow cellar. Inside were fragments of human bone, teeth, and small vertebrae, each tagged with copper wire and parchment labels marked with those same codes, C1 through C12. Yet even before that grim discovery, whispers had circulated among Ashbourne's older residents. There were tales of infants heard crying beneath the ground, of smoke rising from the hollow even when no fire was lit. Farm hands who worked the periphery of the Whitlock property refused to stay after dark, claiming they saw lanterns that moved without carriers. In a surviving confession dated January 1847, Ada Raines wrote, "He calls them vessels now. He says the blood carries memory. He keeps the jars close to her bed, says she must be surrounded by her own purity. I hear her whisper to them as though they answer back. She, of course, was Eleanor, by then 22 years old, confined to an upstairs room whose windows had been bricked from within. Dr. Stokes's periodic visits continued until 1848, each time affirming that her condition remained deteriorating yet contained. His last note describes pupil constriction under candle light and pulse irregularity consistent with ether exposure. What he could not explain, or refused to, was how Eleanor survived such treatments at all. A different kind of record emerges that same year, a sworn statement from laborer Isaac Corbin, one of the last servants to remain at Briar Hollow. His testimony, given decades later when he was an old man, adds a layer of human horror to what had previously been mere conjecture. Mr. Whitlock, he made us dig under the west wing, said it was for storage, but the air down there it was wrong. Felt thick, smelled like rust and roses. He brought the girl down once. I heard her scream, then nothing. Next day he told me the room was sealed and that no one must ever speak of it. Paid me double. I left before the week was done. If Corbin's statement is true, that sealed room beneath the west wing was the heart of Nathaniel's operation, the site of what later witnesses described as the joining. A single surviving drawing from Nathaniel's notes, recovered from Dr. Crane's effects after his death, depicts an anatomical diagram, two figures joined at the chest by an intricate pattern of veins and arteries, looping in ways no human physiology could allow. Beneath it the words, "The pure will correct the impure." From this phrase, modern scholars derived the name of the presumed project, the purity sequence, Nathaniel's attempt to purge what he called hereditary decay through physical recombination of bloodlines. The year 1848 marked a turning point. County reports mention a house fire of limited spread at the Whitlock estate, though officially blamed on faulty lantern storage. Local witnesses swore the flames came from beneath the ground. Reverend Deemer's sermon that following Sunday makes veiled reference to it. Beware the man who seeks to perfect creation, for he will find himself correcting God. After the fire, Ada Raines's tone changes entirely. Her letters grow shorter, more desperate. He has taken to speaking in Scripture, says she is almost ready. The jars are fewer now. He empties them in the garden when the moon is high. The soil shines where the blood falls. Then, in the spring of 1849, the final entry in her hand appears. The girl no longer sleeps. She hums in two voices. No records from Briar Hollow exist after that date. Tax ledgers show the property marked abandoned by early 1850. Nathaniel Whitlock's death certificate lists consumption, though the handwriting of the attending physician is curiously similar to Dr. Stokes's. No burial is recorded, only the words, "remains not recovered." When the estate was sold to the Holcomb family in 1852, surveyors noted significant subsidence near the western cellar and unusual deposits of salt and ash. No one excavated. The ground was covered with stone and left undisturbed for nearly 70 years. But the soil there by every account never cooled. If the first two parts chronicled the decay of faith and family, this third marks the shift into something colder, the fusion of religion and science into a creed of blood. The remaining portions of the archive, the fragments that survived, speak of what was left behind in those rooms and of the voices that returned when the stones were disturbed again in the early 1900s. The Whitlock name would vanish from public record after 1850, but the experiments did not end there. Something or someone preserved the sequence. The resurrection file, 1902-1911, for half a century, Briar Hollow lay dormant. The estate passed through legal limbo, bought, abandoned, sold, then neglected once more. Local memory softened around it like rot. Children in Ashbourne told stories of lights in the trees, of faint lullabies drifting across the marsh. But the house itself, what remained of it, stood silent, windows boarded, roof sagging inward, a monument to what the county preferred to forget. It was not until 1902 that the first official record of renewed entry appears. The Ashbourne Historical and Genealogical Society commissioned a young researcher named Dr. Arthur Llewellyn to catalogue antebellum estates of medical significance. He arrived at Briar Hollow on April 9th and remained there until June 3rd. What he found, he recorded in meticulous shorthand notebook, stew of which survived the later fire at his boarding house in 1907. His initial entries read like those of any scholar, precise, detached, quietly curious. House overgrown, timbers sound despite neglect, substantial flooding in lower halls, found remnants of laboratory equipment, retorts, copper stills, anatomical sketches of primitive accuracy, several sealed chambers beneath the west wing, inaccessible due to subsidence. But by mid-April, the tone of his writing changes. Detached observation gives way to unease. At night, the floorboards throb. The air grows warm in the cellar, though no furnace remains. Discovered jars embedded in the soil. Fluid cloudy, organic matter suspended. One jar broke upon handling. Odor indescribable, faintly sweet. I have begun to dream in duplicate voices. Cross-referencing his notes with Ada Raines's last surviving letters revealed an uncanny alignment. The locations Llewellyn described matched her mentions of the sealed room and the humming. Yet what is most chilling is that he could not have read her letters. They were not made public until 1910. The Llewellyn journals, long suppressed by the Historical Society, resurfaced only in 1974. The most complete copy is housed at the University of Charleston's Archive of Anomalous Studies. The following passages, reproduced verbatim, remain among the most unsettling in 19th century research literature. May 2nd. Beneath the ash layer I found a slab of limestone carved with a pattern of veins, no artistry, more like anatomy. It was warm to the touch, faintly pulsing. I pressed my ear against it and heard what I first took for the sea, but we are 50 miles inland. May 5th. Retrieved glass fragments bearing marks C11 and C12, contained minute bones fused in unnatural conjunctions, not infantile, not adult, something between. The soil emits phosphorescence under darkness. My compass behaves erratically. May 11th. Dreamt of a woman with two faces, one asleep, one awake. She whispered a number I could not forget, 7. I woke with blood on my collar. His final legible entry, dated May 17th, is only 3 lines long. The heart is still here. I have seen it move. The sound in the walls is not the wind. After that, nothing. Llewellyn's disappearance became local legend. His lodgings in town were later found intact, his belongings undisturbed, save for a single copper tag on his desk engraved S7. For decades afterward, Briar Hollow once again fell silent. The society sealed its reports. The land was deemed unstable. And the few who trespassed there spoke only of sickness that clung to them afterward. Nausea, hallucinations, the sense of hearing whispers underground. Then, in 1911, the county approved excavation for a new telegraph relay along the western ridge of the old Whitlock property. The contractor's log from August 3rd records this event with bureaucratic brevity. Unearthed foundation stones and sealed vault. Vault contained organic remains of indeterminate nature. No valuables. Site recovered per instruction. But one worker, Jonas Weller, later recounted a different version in a letter to his brother, preserved in private collections. The vault wasn't empty. There was a table made of stone and something on it like a heart, but dry, like it had been waiting. When we lifted the slab, it started to hum. Not loud, more like it was breathing. The foreman told us to bury it again. I still hear it sometimes. That letter was never mailed. It was found folded into the lining of Weller's jacket after his death in 1913, suicide by drowning in the Ashbourne River. The official county file, labeled Incident 47B Unidentified Remains, was quietly withdrawn from public record the following year. But a notation on the last page, written in the hand of a county clerk named E. Holcomb reads simply, structure appears reactive to presence, recommend permanent containment. The name Holcomb, of course, belonged to the family who had owned the land since 1852. Whether that clerk was a descendant or merely shared, the name remains uncertain. What is clear is that, even after 70 years, the Whitlock property remained capable of unsettling those who crossed its threshold. In 1911, a final memorandum from the Society closed the file. Briar Hollow is to be omitted from future surveys. The Whitlock materials are to remain sealed under Section 14 of the Public Health Preservation Act. No further excavation to be undertaken without ecclesiastical oversight. The word ecclesiastical is telling. Whatever they uncovered, or feared they might, had passed beyond the scope of science. The property was fenced and left to erode. Within 2 years, vegetation had swallowed the ruins entirely. Local cartographers stopped including it on their maps by 1915, and yet every spring the soil above the West Wing's foundations is said to bloom prematurely, lush and red, veined as though something beneath still breathes warmth into the roots. When modern researchers reopened the Ashbourne archives in the 1970s, they noted that Llewellyn's shorthand symbols matched Nathaniel Whitlock's anatomical diagrams almost exactly, despite having been written nearly 60 years apart. The recurrence of the number 7, both in Elinor's designations and Llewellyn's dreams, suggested continuity, an unbroken thread of study or consciousness. Whether what he heard in the walls was an echo of his own pulse or something older, something that had learned to mimic the rhythm of life, remains unknown. All that can be said with certainty is this: from 1834 to 1911, the Whitlock estate endured through generations of silence, its experiments preserved by soil and superstition. The house may have fallen, but its architecture, the design written in veins, in ash, in whispered numbers, persisted. And when the floodlights were finally switched on in 1974 during the archival dig, the soil beneath the West Wing shimmered faintly under electric light, as though acknowledging recognition after a century of darkness. The reopening 1974-1981 for 63 years, Briar Hollow lay forgotten beneath vines and oak roots. The county boundaries changed, the last Whitlock descendants moved west, and the estate's name vanished from land records altogether. It might have remained that way, wallowed by soil and time, if not for a freak storm in 1974 that unearthed the foundation again. On March 19th, hurricane winds tore through Ashbourne County, uprooting trees and collapsing a section of the ridge road near the old property. When daylight returned, residents found the earth split open along the western edge of the Whitlock tract. Beneath the churned mud stood a wall, brick, ancient and streaked with something dark that did not look like rust. 2 local boys, unaware of what they'd stumbled upon, crawled inside through the crack. They emerged screaming. Their mother later told the Ashbourne Courier that they spoke of faces pressed into the stone, and a sound like breathing under the floor. The boys refused to return, and both would suffer recurring nightmares for years afterward. Within weeks, the Ashbourne Historical Society dispatched a team of graduate researchers led by Dr. Miriam Hensley, a forensic anthropologist from Chapel Hill. Their task was to assess the site's archaeological significance before a timber company bulldozed the area. What they found would consume the next 7 years of Hensley's life, and end 3 of her team members' careers. The team established a field camp along the ridge in late April. Initial surveys revealed layers of stone foundation matching 19th century construction, but deeper strata contained elements impossible for that era: fragments of vitrified glass, copper wire interwoven with bone, and ash that tested positive for both human and animal DNA. Hensley's early notes, preserved in the University of North Carolina archives, describe her first descent into what she called the Whitlock Vault. "It smells wrong, wet metal and old blood, the walls sweat. We found carvings beneath the soot layer, anatomical in nature, though stylized: heart, eye, womb, but all connected by branching lines like a circulatory diagram. The pattern repeats in 7s, always 7s. The deeper they dug, the stranger the finds became." In June, technician Robert Calhoun uncovered a sealed lead cylinder marked simply S7. Inside was a folded sheet of vellum covered in handwriting no one could immediately identify. It was written in reverse Latin, mirrored from right to left. When transcribed, the words read, "When the blood learns to listen, the flesh will remember the shape of God." The vellum was later tested and found to contain traces of human tissue in the ink itself. In late July, an incident occurred that nearly ended the dig. According to Hensley's private correspondence, later leaked in 1989, Calhoun began suffering vivid auditory hallucinations. He claimed he could hear the ground whispering and insisted there was a heartbeat under the stairs. On August 3rd, he vanished from the campsite. His body was found 3 days later, a mile downstream, eyes open, lungs filled not with water but with fine ash. The coroner's report listed respiratory asphyxiation due to particulate inhalation. But the team's cook, Eleanor Finch, told investigators something else. His mouth was full of red dust. But when they wiped it away, the dust kept bleeding. After Calhoun's death, Hensley shut down the primary vault excavation and focused instead on cataloging recovered materials. Among these was a broken nameplate bearing the inscription A. Llewellyn, 1902, confirming that Dr. Arthur Llewellyn's journals had not been exaggerations. In November 1974, a second anomaly surfaced. Beneath the main chamber, ground, penetrating radar detected a cavity roughly the size of a small room. Against state recommendations, Hensley authorized a core sample. The bore returned not soil but organic residue, dense, fibrous, and pulsing faintly under light. Samples were sent to Duke University for analysis. The report came back inconclusive, noting only that the material exhibited metabolic activity inconsistent with decay. One line from the laboratory addendum stands out. Specimen retains trace bioelectric potential when stimulated by 6 THz current, possible post-mortem contractility. After that, funding became scarce, the society grew nervous, newspaper interest turned feverish, and whispers spread of resurrection experiments and flesh batteries. The Ashbourne County Commission revoked Hensley's excavation permit in 1975, citing public safety and moral integrity. But she didn't stop. Over the next 6 years, Hensley continued her work in secret, assisted by 2 loyal colleagues, Dr. Lionel Graves, a historian of esoteric medicine, and Patrick Miles, a field surveyor. They moved the primary artifacts to a hidden lab beneath the old Ashbourne Chapel, a structure built, ironically, by the same Holcomb family who had once ordered the vault sealed. Graves' private writings, declassified in 1998, reveal the horrifying persistence of their research. We have confirmed that the tissue responds to sound frequencies. Below 30 Hz, it contracts. Above 70 Hz, it exudes fluid rich in hemoglobin. Hensley believes it's a remnant of Whitlock's work. The resonant flesh he described. She's convinced it remembers. In March 1978, the team conducted what would become known as the Ashbourne resonance test. Using low-frequency oscillation, they exposed a small fragment of the preserved organic matter to sustained vibration. The sample expanded by nearly 40% before liquefying. The sound of the reaction was described as a slow human sigh. That same night, power in the entire town flickered out for 7 minutes. When light returned, the chapel basement was empty. Every record of the experiment, notes, photographs, and biological samples had vanished. The only evidence that anything had occurred was a faint scorch mark on the wall in the shape of a hand. Hensley vanished soon after. Graves fled to New York and died institutionalized in 1981, muttering about the 7 veins of God. Miles returned to Ashbourne once, in 1980, only to be found hanged in his hotel room the next morning. On the night of his death, witnesses reported hearing a deep humming coming from beneath the ground near the old chapel. When the state repossessed the property in 1982, the soil tests showed abnormal magnetism, and plant roots in the area grew in spiral formations, converging toward the site of the old Whitlock vault. It's been decades since anyone's dared to dig there again, but local folklore insists that on certain nights, particularly when the air is damp and still, you can hear a sound beneath the ridge, steady and rhythmic, like a heart trying to remember how to beat. Some say it's the earth shifting. Others say it's the purity sequence, still unfinished, still waiting for someone to listen. The Recovery 2019-2023, the Whitlock estate had been dormant for nearly 40 years when the first digital traces resurfaced. In June 2019, A graduate researcher named Evan Norcross from Duke University stumbled across a misfiled archive in the North Carolina Historical Repository. The folder, labeled simply ASH-77H, contained digitized reels from a University of Chapel Hill excavation project, 1974-1978. There were only 5 surviving microfilms, their labels corroded, but each bore a distinctive mark, a small hand, pressed seal in red wax shaped like a branching root. Evan, a quiet doctoral student in bioarchaeology, thought he'd uncovered nothing more than a forgotten excavation log. He scanned the first reel into the university database and let the machine run overnight. By morning, the lab's power had tripped twice, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. When he checked the output, the scanner had converted less than half the material, but what it captured was deeply unsettling. The recovered images depicted an anatomical diagram unlike any recorded in known medical literature, a series of human silhouettes drawn over topographical maps of Ashbourne County. Each figure's circulatory system was replaced by the outline of roads, rivers, and fault lines. At the bottom of every page appeared the same phrase in faint pencil: "The land remembers what the blood forgets." Over the following week, Evan became obsessed with tracing the origin of the files. He found that the real numbers matched catalog entries associated with Dr. Miriam Hensley's excavation, the same project shut down after the deaths in 1974. There should have been at least 30 reels, not 5. 25 were missing, their access logs corrupted. On July 2nd, he requested clearance to view physical materials from the Ashbourne County Courthouse. The archivist, a woman named Ellen Reeves, hesitated. "Those are locked materials," she said. "State restrictions since the 70s. You'll need faculty sponsorship." Evan applied. 2 days later, his request was inexplicably approved. The boxes arrived sealed with brittle tape and smelled faintly metallic. Inside were 3 notebooks, each embossed with the initials M.H. and filled with dense handwriting. Pages were glued together with an unknown resin, forcing him to separate them carefully. The contents made little sense at first: columns of measurements, fragments of Latin, references to resonant field densities, and bioelectric harmonics. But the final entry, dated February 13, 1978, froze him. "The sequence completes itself tonight. The tissue is awake. It hears. The valley hums when we speak." That was the night of the blackout. Over the next month, Evan's search consumed him. He isolated in his dorm, replaying the digitized tapes and transcribing the distorted sound embedded in the reels. Audio engineers later confirmed that beneath the static there was a loaf. Frequency pulse 22 Hz, barely audible but strong enough to cause disorientation and nausea when amplified. On August 9th, he uploaded the cleaned file to a private academic forum. The post title read, "Unknown Biophysical Frequency Ashbourne Sequence." Within hours, his account was locked and the file removed. The server admin claimed the upload contained potentially harmful spectral data. No further explanation was given. 2 days later, Evan vanished. His apartment was found undisturbed, computer powered off, notes burned to ash in a glass bowl. The only surviving document was a single page left on his desk, one of Hensley's diagrams drawn over in pen. Across it, he had written in large block letters, "She was right. It's not dead." For months, the story remained buried within academia, dismissed as a case of stress and obsession. That changed in April 2020, when a data recovery group known as Project Coldlight claimed to have located portions of Evan's deleted uploads on dark web archives. They released a 45-second audio clip allegedly extracted from Ashbourne sequence #3. It begins with static, then a deep hum. At 7 seconds, something faint becomes audible beneath the drone, breathing slow and irregular. At 21 seconds, a whisper, "Open the 7th vein." The clip ends abruptly. Listeners reported headaches, vertigo, and in some cases, nosebleeds. Coldlight's website was taken offline within a week, and its domain ownership transferred to a shell company in Virginia. But by then, the damage was done. The sound had spread. It was mirrored, remixed, shared through music subcultures as a haunted frequency. You can still find fragments hidden in ambient tracks uploaded to YouTube under pseudonyms. View long enough and the comments turn unsettling. Can you hear it breathing at 0:17? My phone started vibrating when the bass drops. It's still under the ground, the hum never stopped. In late 2021, a maintenance crew near Ashbourne reported hearing a droning sound like a generator beneath the soil while repairing fiber lines. Sensors registered low-level electromagnetic activity spanning nearly 4 miles around the old chapel ruins, the same radius that once contained the Whitlock estate. By early 2022, state investigators had traced multiple instances of unexplained interference, GPS drift, sudden radio static, shorted equipment. Whenever heavy rainfall saturated the area, environmental scientists speculated about subterranean iron deposits. Others whispered that something buried deep still moved when the ground was wet. Then, in August 2023, a construction team widening Route 57 unearthed a section of brick foundation on the Whitlock track. Inside the cavity was a lead container, identical to the S7 cylinder recovered by Hensley in 1974. This one was engraved S8. The lid was fused shut, but inside it rattled faintly, as if containing liquid. State protocol dictated immediate transfer to Raleigh for hazardous material analysis, but the truck carrying the artifact never arrived. Dashcam footage recovered from the convoy's lead vehicle shows the moment before disappearance, a shimmer on the asphalt, headlights dimming, and then static. The transport was found the next morning, engine still warm, driver gone. The cylinder remained in the cab, dented but unopened. Radiation levels were normal. Inside, according to official statement, was a quantity of desiccated organic matter consistent with preserved human tissue. Unofficially, one of the cleanup technicians later told a reporter from the Herald-Sun, "It twitched when they touched it, just once, but I saw it." The object now resides in State Storage Facility 9, labeled Whitlock Artifact Restricted Material. Access is classified. Still, researchers who have reviewed the files note something chilling. Every sound sample from the Ashbourne area, old or new, contains the same recurring harmonic at 22 Hz. It matches precisely the pulse measured in Hensley's 1978 resonance test. Whatever she awakened has never fully gone silent. The journals of 1008-139, the Whitlock Journal, surfaced unexpectedly, not in an archive or attic, but in an estate sale box mislabeled assorted devotional texts. The discovery occurred in March 2024, when an antiquarian bookseller from Charleston, Samuel Lear, purchased several crates of books from the abandoned Greenville Theological College. Among the Bibles and Psalters, he found a small calf-bound volume with pages of thick vellum, the spine cracked, and a rust-red stain that had bled through the bottom edge. The first page bore only 2 words in slanted iron gall ink: "To purify the line 1839. Lear initially assumed it to be a treatise on eugenics or rural medicine, hardly unusual for the period, but when he leafed deeper, he found sketches of human anatomy annotated with botanical terms, veins labeled as roots, the heart described as the soil's sun. Tucked between pages 42 and 43 was a folded scrap of parchment bearing the Whitlock family crest, a serpent biting its own tail, encircling a seedling. By April, the journal had been authenticated by historians as belonging to Dr. Jonathan Whitlock, the patriarch of the family whose estate had dominated Ashbourne County in the early 1800s. The text was partly in English, partly in archaic Latin, and occasionally written in a cipher later identified as a modified pigpen system, common among secret societies. The university scanned the text for preservation. The first complete translation was finished by Professor Marion Coerner, a linguistic anthropologist from the University of Virginia, in August 2024. What she found was less a medical journal and more a doctrinal record of obsession. Excerpts from the Whitlock Journal translated 1839-1846 April 3, 1839. The children weaken. Their eyes are pale as ash, their joints twist when the weather cools. I suspect the soil itself leaches the iron from them. I have begun the experiments anew. Blood to blood, bone to bone. The element will balance in time. August 27, 1840. I have examined the infants born of the third coupling. Their pulses resonate alike, a single rhythm as though from one body divided. I recorded the sound with my stethoscope. It hums at the same pitch as the valley wind. January 11, 1842. The seventh formula holds. The mixture binds vitality to terrain. If the living body is merely clay, then the earth may be refined by the same principle. A child of both will not perish so long as the valley feeds. October 4, 1843. Rebecca refuses another operation. She says she dreams of roots growing through her ribs. The hum follows her even in sleep. I have confined her to the lower rooms until she consents. She must understand. Purity requires pain. March 19, 1845. I buried the third subject tonight. The skin had turned translucent, the vessels luminous as the lightning in the storms. It sang faintly in the soil. I fear the resonance persists even after decay. Coroner noted in her report that several pages had been cut out cleanly with a blade, replaced by later insertions written in another hand. Fainter, shakier, likely by a descendant. One note reads simply, "He made the land breathe." Another, undated, "The hum is in the roots. It comes through the water now." More disturbing still were the diagrams. One showed a map of Ashbourne Valley, veins of blue ink radiating from a central point. The old manor's cellar. The lines extended to nearby wells and creeks, labeled Vessel I, Vessel Roman II, and so forth. Around the edges, Whitlock scrawled the same formula repeatedly: 7 parts flesh, 1 part soil, 3 parts heat. Repeat until stillness hums. Professor Coroner concluded her translation with a brief statement. Whitlock's so-called purity sequence appears to describe a series of alchemical transfusions, attempts to merge biological life with the mineral substrate of the estate. It is unclear whether this was symbolic or literal. However, given subsequent reports of genetic deformity and auditory phenomena, further investigation is warranted. Her remarks might have ended there had not the university received a second volume. In September 2024, a package arrived from an anonymous sender in Savannah. Inside was a ledger bound in oilcloth, the first page dated June 6, 1008, 146, 3 months after Whitlock's recorded death. The handwriting matched neither his nor Coroner's previous samples. Yet the title was unmistakable: Continuation of the Sequence. The anonymous chronicler writes, "He told us the soil must be fed until it remembers. The breath does not end at the lungs, it moves below. I have taken his marrow and mixed it as instructed. The field is quiet now, but when the rain comes it hums again." Scholars were divided. Some argued it was a forgery, a modern hoax inspired by the first journal's discovery, but when infrared scans were performed, iron gall ink aging patterns matched those of mid-19th century manufacture. The words were authentic. By late 2024, the Whitlock materials were sealed under state directive pending investigation of their cultural sensitivity and bioethical implications. Privately, Coroner told her assistant she had begun hearing a faint vibration in her office whenever she handled the digital scans. It registered nowhere on instruments, but could be felt in the bones of her jaw. 3 weeks later, she was found unconscious at her desk, both eardrums ruptured. The computer screen showed a repeating line of text, copied from the journal margins, to cleanse the line "The heart must open." She survived, but never returned to teaching. As word of the incident spread, the files were quietly removed from the academic server. Researchers who had downloaded them began reporting corrupted folders, images replaced by repeating bands of static and faint silhouettes. One technician swore that when viewed in sequence, The corrupted frames formed a pulsing anatomical outline, perfectly matching the topography of Ashbourne County. The last email coroner sent before being hospitalized was to the state curator. The subject line read, "They completed it, we're the continuation." The body of the message was blank except for a single attachment, a scanned page from the journal showing the serpent seal and the number 22 inscribed beneath it, an unmistakable reference to the 22 Hertz resonance discovered by both Hensley and Norcross a century later. The implication was horrifying. Whitlock's experiments had not merely polluted his bloodline, they had altered the landscape itself, encoding biological rhythm into the valley's physical resonance. Coroner's final notes were recovered months later. Scrawled in pencil, uneven, almost childlike, they read, "We were wrong to call it inheritance. It was infection. The excavation 2025 by the spring of 2025, the Whitlock site had become more than an academic curiosity. It was a controlled hazard zone." After Coroner's collapse and Norcross's disappearance, the Department of Cultural Preservation authorized a forensic excavation under federal oversight. The objective was strictly defined: document, secure, and sterilize any remaining biological material associated with the Whitlock estate before redevelopment of the surrounding valley began. The lead researcher was Dr. Helena Marrow, a forensic anthropologist from Georgetown, known for her calm precision and unwillingness to entertain superstition. Her preliminary report dated March 3, 2025, reads with bureaucratic restraint, "Subject site displays subsidence consistent with early 19th century foundations. No immediate signs of hazardous waste. However, subsoil humidity readings fluctuate at intervals uncorrelated with weather conditions. Seismic monitors register continuous tremor amplitude of 22 Hz. Possible instrumentation error." Marrow's team consisted of 6 specialists, including Dr. Isaac Perrault, an osteologist who had previously worked with Coroner, and technician Mee Hollins, a field engineer responsible for equipment calibration. They arrived at Ashbourne in late March, setting up camp among the collapsed chimneys and the skeletal oaks that still marked the Whitlock property. From the beginning, they noticed the silence. The air lacked birdsong. Even insects seemed absent. The soil itself appeared unnaturally dark, clumping like damp flesh. On March 29th, while trenching near the coordinates of the old cellar, Holland's ground-penetrating radar detected a hollow cavity approximately 14 feet beneath the surface. The cavity formed an ovoid chamber roughly 3 meters wide, lined with stone, and containing a mass that reflected both metallic and organic signatures. The next day, Marrow authorized a slow descent excavation, following standard forensic protocol. At 3:45 p.m., a faint hum began vibrating through the scaffolding. Instruments confirmed a persistent frequency 22 Hz, emanating from the cavity itself. The source was mechanical in rhythm but biological in waveform. At 4:10, the first object appeared, a lead cylinder identical to S7 and S8. This one bore a newer marking, S1, etched directly into the metal rather than engraved. It appeared corroded but sealed. The team tagged it for containment, planning to extract it the next morning. But that night, something changed. Field log, Dr. Isaac Perrault, March 30, 2025 02:07 a.m. Sound returned around midnight. It began as a vibration under the cot, rising like a heartbeat through the frame. Mee says she saw movement near the pit, ripples in the soil, as if water were shifting below. Helena ordered everyone to stay inside the tent. "The frequency's getting stronger. My teeth ache." By dawn, several instruments had failed. Batteries drained, magnetic compasses spinning aimlessly. The hum continued, pulsing faintly beneath their feet. At 09:23 a.m., Marrow began recording again. Her voice, calm but strained, survives on the recovered audio. Beginning surface clearance over cavity 1. S1 cylinder remains visible. Note faint movement of surrounding sediment. Possible gas expansion. She pauses. "Wait, it's sinking." A sharp metallic groan follows. Then the sound of collapsing soil, the feed cuts. When communication was re-established 15 minutes later, 2 team members were missing, Hollins and field assistant Callum Dyer. The chamber had opened into a vertical shaft, narrow and smooth, walled as if melted. Marrow ordered an immediate suspension of work, but before retreating, she noticed something glinting inside the shaft. A glass vessel, she described it as file-like, about 10 inches long, containing what appeared to be suspended tissue, pale strands coiling and uncoiling, faintly luminous. Against protocol, she retrieved it. Within hours, she began exhibiting tremors and nausea. Her field notes, later recovered from her tablet, grow progressively erratic. The light moves in rhythm with my pulse. It's whispering. I think it remembers him. 22, 22. It's counting. By April 2, Marrow was airlifted to a containment facility in Raleigh. The excavation was sealed, the site declared unsafe due to subsurface instability. 3 days later, security footage from the containment lab recorded the file rupturing spontaneously. No pressure or temperature anomaly preceded the event. From the rupture point, a translucent filament extended outward, vibrating so rapidly it blurred. The waveform matched exactly the 22 Hz frequency. Within minutes, every metallic object in the lab began to resonate. The sound built until the feed distorted. Technicians later described it as a living engine breathing through the walls. When silence returned, Marrow was gone. The only thing left at her workstation was her recorder, still running. Her last words, "The hum isn't sound, it's inheritance." The Whitlock excavation officially ended that same week. Equipment was buried in place under cement and lime. But by late April, residents in nearby East Haven began reporting low thunder under the ground, recurring every evening at 9:00 p.m. Government seismographs attributed it to wind tunnels or microseismic resonance from groundwater flow. Yet the frequency data, released briefly before reclassification, showed a perfect 22 Hz signal across an area spanning 9 square miles. The same pattern, the same pulse. Extract from an anonymous letter received May 2025, delivered to the Raleigh facility security desk, unsigned, handwritten in blue pencil. You think you've buried it, but you haven't. You can't. The Whitlock line was only the beginning. The hum isn't local, it's systemic. Every living body carries the potential for resonance. The old doctor didn't create it. He tuned it. That's why it spreads. That's why you feel it in your teeth when you stand near the soil. I've been listening for months. The sound is growing. It's coming from beneath us all now. A few weeks later, heavy rains struck Ashbourne Valley. Locals captured video of the old riverbed flooding, water glowing faintly under lightning. The footage is grainy, but one frame shows a shape rising briefly through the current, as if something beneath the earth exhaled. State agencies dismissed it as light reflection, but the scientists who reviewed the footage noticed a recurring pattern in the waveform overlay: 7 pulses, pause, 1, 3, repeat. It was the same numerical ratio Whitlock had written in 1008, 143, 7 parts flesh, 1 part soil, 3 parts heat. The purity sequence, it had activated again. The inheritance 2025-2026, the official reports from the Ashbourne Containment Project ended abruptly in mid-May 2025. No closure statement, no publication of findings, just a single-line update issued by the Department of Cultural Preservation, site sealed, further study suspended indefinitely due to subsurface instability. That same week, residents of East Haven began abandoning their homes. It started as a rumor, something about the hum. The noise was faint at first, barely audible, like the vibration of a refrigerator coil. But as summer approached, it deepened, becoming tactile. People said they could feel it inside their bones. Glasses rattled in cupboards at precise intervals. Wells began to overflow with dark water that smelled faintly metallic. At 22 Hz, the human ear registers not a tone but a sensation, a pressure at the base of the skull. Doctors across Dupin County reported sudden spikes in migraines, nosebleeds, and disorientation, a few cases of psychosis. The patients all described the same dream, a room beneath the earth. The soil was breathing. It knew my name. The Whitlock story was resurfacing again. Journal fragment Dr. Isaac Perrault recovered July 2025. Marrow was right. The hum isn't sound, it's transmission, something old communicating through density. I've traced the signal to beneath the original riverbed. It's moving, pulsing like a vascular system. The Whitlocks weren't experimenting with resurrection. They were attempting inheritance, passing consciousness through the medium of soil, a kind of biological archive, and they succeeded. The hum is Whitlock. By August, East Haven was declared a temporary exclusion zone. The government brought in contractors from a private geophysical firm named O'Reilly Systems under the guise of infrastructure assessment. Unofficially, they were tracking the resonance pattern. O'Reilly's deployed seismic sensors, hydrophones, and electromagnetic monitors. Within 2 days, their chief technician, Omar Navarro, filed an internal memo noting that the hum synchronized with human heartbeat intervals within a 5-mile radius. In other words, the ground pulsed in time with the living population above it. At exactly 3:07 a.m. on August 11, all data streams froze simultaneously. Cameras showed distortion, grainy static that briefly formed an image resembling a face pressing outward through the screen. Navarro went missing that night. His final log entry: "It's not beneath us anymore, it's around us. The soil's just the medium. The real structure is inside the body. Every vibration, every drop of iron, every pulse. We are part of its archive now." Meanwhile, the Whitlock journals, those earlier transcribed and published by Norcross, vanished from public archives. The university that hosted the digital versions reported the corruption affecting only those files. Every word, every diagram gone, but one local librarian, Ellen Dre, had downloaded copies months earlier. She posted them to an obscure historical blog under the title Inheritance of Soil, the Whitlock Hypothesis. Within hours, the blog crashed under unexplained bandwidth surges. Before it went offline, readers noticed a pattern hidden in the text metadata. Each document contained faint, invisible text strings embedded in the code. When compiled, they formed a single phrase: "The hum remembers the shape of thought." In September, satellite thermal imaging of the Ashbourne Valley revealed something unprecedented: heat signatures forming a spiral pattern nearly a mile wide, centered exactly where Hollow Crest once stood. The spiral rotated counterclockwise, its movement imperceptible to the naked eye but measurable across successive frames. The center of the spiral glowed faintly red, precisely 22 degrees above ambient temperature. That number again, 22, field recording transcript emergency response October 3, 2025 static, then heavy breathing, voices shouting. Responder 1, the ground's moving again, get away from the ridge. Responder 2, it's not a landslide, it's swelling. Responder 1, something's coming up Jesus, it's screaming, static distortion. Responder 2, that's not rocket's tissue. Audio analysis confirms that what responders called tissue vibrated at 22 Hz, identical to the previous hum frequency. Later reports describe a mound forming overnight, pale and fibrous, exuding steam in the morning cold. By dawn, the mound had deflated, leaving behind a circular impression in the soil, a perfect spiral carved into the earth. Within the center, investigators found bone fragments that did not correspond to any known human or animal structure. Each piece was smooth, translucent, and hollow, as if designed to transmit sound. The official report classified them as mineralized roots. Unofficial photos leaked to journalists say otherwise. Excerpt: Inheritance, the Whitlock Resonance. Unpublished monograph, 2026. The Whitlock family believed that knowledge could be grown. Their soil experiments were not symbolic. They intended literal cultivation of memory. Whitlock himself wrote that the flesh of the earth will recall what was buried within it. He created a resonant media. The living archive, the hum is its respiration. Every vibration, every frequency is recollection. When the fire consumed the estate in 1847, the structure did not die, it integrated. Over generations, each rainfall, each seed carried part of its code. The 22 Hz signal is the archive's heartbeat, syncing with the biosphere. Humanity has been listening to its own memory buried under layers of soil. In early 2026, a phenomenon known as the Dupin resonance began spreading along the eastern seaboard. Residents in coastal towns reported tremors with no seismic source. Crops along the Whitlock Valley grew rapidly, then blackened within days. Cattle refused to graze, dogs howled at empty fields. By spring, the phenomenon had spread to neighboring counties. The hum deepened to 18 hertz, lower, slower, closer to the rhythm of sleep. Hospitals recorded spikes in cardiac arrhythmia. Some people stopped sleeping entirely, saying the vibrations reached them through the mattress. Dr. Perrault, now the last surviving member of the excavation, sent one final message to a journalist before vanishing. "We thought we were studying history. We were studying an ecosystem. The Whitlock archive isn't a relic, it's adaptive. It consumes whatever observes it. The moment we listened, we became part of it." By mid-2026, East Haven was reclaimed by the state and fenced off under the guise of environmental hazard. But drone footage taken months later showed vegetation growing in spiral patterns, leaves trembling rhythmically as if moved by an internal wind. The hum, residents say, never stopped. It only changed pitch. On quiet nights, they claim, if you press your ear to the ground, you can hear whispering, counting over and over, 7, 1, 3, 7, 1, 3. Some say it's the old doctor, still cataloging his inheritance. Others think it's the soil itself, remembering every hand that ever touched it. And if you stay too long, if you listen too closely, the hum adjusts to your heartbeat. Once it sinks, it doesn't stop, it follows you. Even after you leave, the final transmission, 2027 present when the official inquiry closed, only a handful of scientists still spoke of the Whitlock hum. They met quietly, trading fragments of corrupted recordings that refused to stay silent. Every file, no matter the device, began to carry a faint sub-layer of sound, a pulse that lined up perfectly with the listener's own heartbeat. By February 2027, it was no longer limited to East Haven. The resonance began appearing in network infrastructure logs, security cameras, even emergency broadcast systems. Technicians described ghost packets, a data that seemed to rewrite itself while being read. O'Reilly Systems, the company that once monitored the field, published one last bulletin before shutting down. "The signal has entered digital space. It isn't interference, it's translation." Archive specialists across the country reported spontaneous synchronization between hard drives that had never been connected. Old phonographs started spinning on their own. Iron weather. Veins sang in low tones whenever storms rolled through. No matter the medium, wood, metal, silicon, the rhythm stayed at 22 beats per second. In March, the National Historical Registry's servers flickered and began displaying a single message on login screens: "The soil remembers." Then the servers went dark. Fragment, personal letter, Dr. Ellen Dre, April 3, 2027. "It isn't sound anymore, it's habit. The world is breathing in time with it. Every pulse, every electric current follows the same pattern. I think that's what the Whitlocks wanted. Continuity, to be remembered not as ghosts but as rhythm. We are the archive now." By late spring, satellites caught faint concentric ripples moving through cloud formations above the old estate. Perfect spirals, invisible to the naked eye but persistent on thermal imaging. The phenomenon expanded until it encompassed the coastline, then simply faded from measurable range. Experts claimed the frequency had dispersed into background noise, but residents said otherwise. The nights grew too still. Birds stopped calling before dawn. Dogs slept with ears pressed to the ground. Then, for a time, nothing happened. In October 2028, a podcast producer restoring old recordings of the original investigation noticed a pattern in the static between segments. When slowed down, it formed a sequence of tones matching the numerical key engraved on Whitlock's family crest. 7-1-3-7-1-3. Listeners who played the episode reported dreams identical to those recorded a century earlier, earth breathing, cellar walls expanding and contracting. Within days, the episode vanished from every platform, replaced by a notice citing unexplained duplication. Still, the mirrors of data remained, millions of silent, identical copies stored on devices around the world. Each copy carried a trace hum that microphones could not register, but that listeners could feel. Epilogue field note undated, unsigned. Every century the record wakes. The hum is not a warning, it's a memory rehearsing itself through us. To listen is to participate. If you are reading this, if the air around you feels just slightly heavy, that means the archive found you. Welcome to the record. If the room feels different now, it's not the story, it's resonance. The same pattern that passed through the soil is traveling through light, screens, and speech. Do you hear the faint vibration between my words? That's the sound of history remembering itself. Keep listening, but not for too long.